I think we'll go ahead and get started. Kudos to the attendees already asking some questions. I see coming in before we even got started. That's fantastic. Well, good afternoon. My name is Sean Beddoes. I'm the Vice President of Global Services here at CT Strategies, where we aim to transform worldwide government customs operations through modernization of infrastructure, workforce, and security technologies. As part of our vision, we provide these free webinars to help inform the trade sector on trusted trader programs and initiatives. So welcome to our latest webinar, where we have gathered a group of CTPAT and AEO executives to discuss the key highlights from the two largest conferences on these subjects. Additionally, we will endeavor to dive in a bit deeper on some of the subjects and topics from those events, and additionally seek your input for additional questions to ask our panelists. So on our esteemed panel today, we have Brendan O'Hearn, Deputy Director of Facilitation at the World Customs Organization. By the way, Brendan, I heard from a little birdie that has a very strong Queens, New York accent, and he reminded me that you were actually instrumental in the original adoption of the AEO concept at the WCO many years ago when the SAFE framework was being drafted. I think Eric Keek may have been one of your partners in crime there from South African Customs, but regardless, thank you very much for all of your contributions to this work. We have Shane Campbell. He is the Deputy Executive Director of Cargo, Conveyance, and Security, or CCS, for CBP's Office of Field Operations. And for everyone's understanding, the CTPAT program falls under the CCS office. So welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Dina Amato is the Director of the CTPAT program. Welcome, Dina. We're glad to have you here. And last but certainly not least is Pete Touhy, and he is the Director of the CTPAT Miami Field Office. So thank you all for being here today. I certainly know how busy you all are. I spent 22 years in CBP myself, so I really appreciate you taking your time to participate in this webinar. I know that you have to manage a lot of priorities on your calendar, so we do appreciate that. Just a few housekeeping announcements. Both Shane and Dina will have to step away a little bit early, but our other two panelists will remain, so please stay with us for the entirety of the session. Also, Susan Thomas, the Executive Director of CCS, sends her regrets for not being able to make the opening remarks. She was unfortunately pulled away at the last minute for work, which we understand, and she certainly is a big supporter of the CTPAT program and the AEO initiative worldwide. So hopefully we can get her on a future webinar. Personally, I think this could be a retaliation for me missing her speaking session at the WCO conference. Possibly, I don't know. I can't prove it, but perhaps that's what happened here. But anyway. Additionally, we'll be selecting questions from the audience, as I mentioned at the start of my remarks. And to ask your questions, please go ahead and click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and you'll be able to ask your questions there. We will try to get to as many questions as possible. We'll try to also group together themes so that hopefully we answer multiple attendees' questions at the same time. Okay, I suppose that some, if not many of you in attendance today may have attended CBP's 2024 Trade Symposium and Cargo Security Summit that was held in Philadelphia a few months back. Or you may have attended the WCO 6th Global AEO Conference, which was held in Shenzhen a few weeks ago. Whether you attended or not, certainly the webinar will provide some valuable insight. So let's jump right in. Shane, you're the first one to go here. Let's start with you. And I recall your speaking session at the CBP conference in Philadelphia when you indicated that at the time, I recall you relatively new to the CCS position, from your prior work out in the field, and some of the nuances about the CTPAT program. So some time has passed, and you also had the privilege of attending that global AEO conference a few weeks back. So now that you've got a bit more time in your role and attended the two biggest AEO related conferences, how do you see the direction of the CTPAT program from that CCS management perspective?
I'm actually doubling down on my talking points that I had at that last session, right? and still new to this. I'm actually at the end of this month, it's a year into this new job, and I got to tell you, I probably need like another 4 years before that, right? There's just so much. Every day I learn something new about AEO programs and CTPAT, and I'm just like, where have I been for 20 years, right? So I really am going to double down on our efforts to streamline, standardize, and modernize. And I'm watching Pete wince because he hears this from me all the time, and he's been hearing it for a year, right? So if I go too long, cut me off, right? Because I can be long-winded. Sure. Let me go in through some of the stuff. So for streamline, what do I mean? Well, at the executive level, we're taking a holistic look at our existing processes and workflows within the CTPAT program. And we're looking to identify the ones that need to be streamlined, because let's face it, we are a government entity and we work like a 1970s bureaucracy. That's another mantra I have. Whereas business moves at the speed of light, literally in some cases, we need to figure out how to get our processes to match today's business world. We should not be holding business back. So we're working with our employees internally who are involved with each of our processes to determine what those processes are for, what their value input is for, how they work, who's involved, and how much time it completes, so that we can do a true analysis to see, are we doing something just because we've done it for 20 years and we think that's what we need to do? Or is there some of that stuff that we can maybe snip away that we really don't have to do anymore? It's just a bureaucratic exercise that we just do because we do it. We've always done it this way, and we've never looked back, right? So we're going to look back, and we're going to try to like fix some of those areas where it's applicable, right? You kind of look at this and say, well, it's the easiest process in the world to just snip away the fat, right? Try that at a government entity. It's not the easiest process in the world, because we're trying to cut the same bureaucracy that we work within, right? And I can tell you, within government, there's not a bureaucratic process that wants to die. So, you know, everyone can put up their reasons for it and to see, well, we have to do it this way. We're snipping through that to the best that we can do. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to follow the steps under Director Amato's leadership, and she's on board with this. We're going to start snipping away to, you know, cut the fat. When I say standardize, we all see it. I've heard from the trade community on a host of different levels that when they call us and when they call maybe the CTPAT office in Buffalo, or they're dealing with a supply chain security specialist in Buffalo, or someone in LA, they may get two different responses for very similar stuff. And I think that's frustrating. It's frustrating for me as the deputy XD. Like, when I get two different answers, I can't imagine how frustrating it is for the trade community when they get that too. So we are really working hard to standardize our processes. It's really important to me that when you deal with CTPAT, you get one face of CTPAT, no matter who you're dealing with. It's our duty to ensure that the information we provide is consistent and that you know what to expect from us. And that in and of itself ensures proper supply chain security. So if I can give you that one path and that one rule, your supply chain is going to be better, which is what the whole CTPAT program was set up to do in the first place, right? Ultimately, standardizing our practices, I think, will help us ourselves improve our processes, improve productivity, and reduce costs for the government. But I think it's going to do the same thing for our trade partners as well. And then when I talk about modernizing, there are two different aspects or roads for the modernization process. The very first one is benefits. And that kind of goes into what I said before about the streamlining, right? Business moves at the speed of light. And I think some of our businesses or some of our benefits may be a little older and may need to be refreshed to, you know, come up with the business processes of the 2020s and what's really needed by our stakeholders in the 2020s and beyond. But I got to tell you on this one, I get a little hesitant because I'm not in private business. I've been in the government for almost 30 years. So this is where I really need input from our stakeholders, and my team needs input from our stakeholders for some benefits that are truly meaningful and that are truly worthwhile for our partners. But there's a couple caveats, right? Some are going to be easy and some are flat out going to be no-goes because some of those benefits may impact supply chain security, which is the opposite of what we want to do. And certainly, of course, we want to take the benefits that's benefits for everyone and not targeted for one specific entity or one specific group, right? They truly have to be whole.
I think Shane froze. No problem. We will adjust. Dina, perhaps since you're not frozen, I can go to you next. Would that be okay?
Of course. I'll freeze.
But yeah, don't freeze. So Dina, the CTPAT program's been around for a while, 20 years now, give or take. Many directors have come and gone during that time. Hi, Shane. I see that you're back. I'll come back to you momentarily. Many of those directors brought with them their own ideas for how to optimize the program. That said, what is your vision for the CTPAT program for, say, the next 5 years? And I'll make it a two-part question because I think the second question connects to this, perhaps. We've seen over the years, for the most part, the minimum security criteria has remained the same or similar. There was a major overhaul in 2020, but even that was, it wasn't like so catastrophic of a change that, that it disrupted everything. And we know it's a slow process to make those changes, but I'm sure some of the attendees, because I hear this in the work that I do, are wondering if within that vision that you have for the next 5 years, if there's any anticipated changes to the minimum security criteria. For example, there has been a lot of outreach about the fentanyl crisis. So then, that then begs the question, is CTPAT going to now make that some sort of requirement that we have to address fentanyl within our supply chain? So those are the two questions. I'll hand it over to you now. Thank you.
Of course. I'm going to go a bit off script for a moment regarding this and just hone in a little bit of what Shane said. That's definitely on the table as part of my priority. We're working with COAC. We're tapping into the centers to see where we can also I can't unveil them yet because I've been in the job 2 months, but I want you to rest assured that this is on my list. I want to tap in, as you said, bringing in your background. I come from being a center director. I have 32 years of trade experience. I'm kind of old out there, but I'm bringing that with me. How can I tap into that environment, partnering with the center and the ports and the industry to come up with benefits that work for all? So I'm bringing that in my imaginary little toolbox with me of how do I tap into the centers? How do I tap into the trade arena to build benefits that work for both CBP and the partners in the field? So I just want to say I am looking at a lot of things right now and partnering with the centers. That's part of my goals to see where we can tap into that arena. Again, right now, Sean, I can't give any deliverables on this call. Again, in the job 8 weeks, but I am looking at several areas where we can build those benefits that I think with partnerships through COAC and organizations like yours, we can build really good benefits. But that's a little bit off script. So I'm going to get back on script and answer those other questions. My priorities are going to be consistency, uniformity, and modernization. Consistency and uniformity, coming again from a trade background, a seaport's different from an air environment. You're going to have some different nuances. I can't promise 100% uniformity across the board because every field office in the field, every center in the field, different environments, require different things. But where we can offer consistency and we can offer uniformity is internally, we're doing a scrub of our standardized operating procedures to make sure that the team in CTPAT, who is phenomenal, by the way, This is nothing to discredit them as an organization. They were great before I came on board, and they'll continue to be great. We just want to move them forward. Is if I can do this scrub on these standard operation, these SOPs inside of CBP, it's an internal thing. There'll be an external benefit. Again, Pete will still have some nuances that maybe Van in Los Angeles doesn't have, but where we can be more consistent by doing an internal scrub, that's what we're aiming on, giving them the guidance and the instructions where they can be consistent, where they can be uniform, offering that internal direction to them. Where that's important to you is then there's an external effect, right? Because if we're better internally, right, that should give you more consistency when you go to the different field offices. Again, I do want to, say I can't give you 100% because I have to allow for the differences in the different field offices, and the rail is different from the air environment. The different venues will need some tweaking. So where we can be consistent and we can be uniform, we're working on that internally, and we're hoping for an external benefit. With the understanding that there could be some little nuances where Pete may have to do something a little bit differently, but it shouldn't be a mind-blowing, effect on the trade. The other thing, like Shane was saying, modernization. This is a very well-seasoned, very, it's a premier organization. When I say modernizing, it's not saying that they're not doing great things, because they are. It's just giving them the technology, giving them the automation and the equipment that they need to move them forward into the next era. So that's on internal leadership to ensure that we're giving them the tools, the automation, and the equipment that they need so they can be modernized, which again will be a great, we're hoping for an external benefit for you. So this is a short list. I am looking at benefits. I'm looking at consistency, uniformity, and modernizing. Did I freeze?
No, we're good.
Okay, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure. So it's a short list. I've been in the job 8 weeks, but I didn't want to give you so much pie in the sky right off the bat. But as I grow in this role, those priorities and they will change. But rest assured, they'll change within partnership with your organization and other trade entities. So I think. Oh, and then you had another question for me, right? You want me to go into that?
About the minimum security criteria, if you envision any changes, updates to that in the next foreseeable future, 5 years.
Yeah, that's perfect. I didn't want to say in the near future because I didn't want anybody leaving thinking in the next 2 or 3 weeks I'm going to have all these changes. Right. It wouldn't be fair for me to say there'll be no changes. That will be part of my priority list as well. But any changes that are made, they'll always be in unison with my team at CTPAT. And of course, where we can, partnering with the trade. So do I see that happening I'll say in the future. I don't want to say in the near future because I don't want to give a false, but yes, there'll always be changes, just like CTPAT and any other program has to move forward and modernize. So do those. Mm-hmm. They also have to change. So is it on my list? Yes. Can you expect something? I'm hoping not in the next 5 years, but is it tomorrow? No, but yes, you can expect some changes, and they will be worked, in conjunction in the partnership where we can with the trade and with my team. So the answer is absolutely yes.
Great. No, thank you for that. And I've got a follow-up question, and really, Dina, Pete, or Shane can jump on this, but Shane mentioned it, and you also mentioned it, Dina, about consistency and trying to present like one face of CTPAT, and I think that's great within reason. Obviously, it can't be exactly the same from person to person, office to office, every small detail. But I know that the CTPAT program has developed and implemented a standardized or reimagined and standardized training program that it now runs out of one of the FLETC law enforcement centers. So is the retraining of the staff, the supply chain security specialists, is that part of that vision in terms of getting to more consistency?
I'll take a shot at it first, and by all means, I'll open it up to Pete and Shane, because we had another panel yesterday, and this came up as well.
Okay.
everything we do is to ensure that the employees have the skills they need to do the job right. And what we're offering, and we're still working through this, so I don't want a commitment that running out because it's still in the works. We still have to work into it. But yes, everything we do is to ensure that whether you are a newer supply chain specialist or a more seasoned one, you have everything that's the latest and greatest to do your job and do it well. Not that they're not doing it well, but just to have the latest and greatest. Because again, things change, right? So maybe we were doing something 20 years ago. We have to evolve. So this training is part of that. But I just want to make it clear, we're still working through some mechanisms with the training, but it is on the horizon. Peter, Shane, I want to turn it over to you in case you want to add anything more.
Pete, I'll let you take a stab and then I'll jump in if you have anything.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I think that plays right into the consistency, uniformity theme. You know, this training now, and Sean, you remember from back in the day, you were with Customs and CTPAT, it was 22 years, but the training we had was maybe a week long, and it was kind of like, hey, do you know what the MSC are? And we had to be quizzed on that. And it was kind of put together. It wasn't, not that it was roughshod, but it wasn't as comprehensive. This is our Office of Training and Development. This is intentional. This is academic. I mean, the organization of this is really, really important for us, but it's also very relevant now. A lot of brain power has been put into this. The best of the best, the SMEs have gone into this training. So we really want to make this the national training, right? That does inform the new SCSSs. It can also inform our current SCSSs. We've had managers go to this training. We also are making it cross-organizational, you know, getting folks from within CCS, you know, to actually be from the Cs, the centers, the national account managers, things like that, to really get that information out there so they understand what CTPAT does, but most importantly, to get some of that uniformity, right? To get that in place and get that to be known throughout our current workforce, but especially for the new folks coming in going forward with CTPAT. So that's what I'll add to what you said, Dina, but you nailed it for sure.
Yeah, so Sean, I just think it would be bad business if we didn't look down this road, right? Every entity out there that I'm aware of, major entity anyways, has employee training and retraining and opportunities to help employees grow. So I've been lucky enough to actually go to the academy and sit in on a couple of these sessions. I think they're really worthwhile. We do have our new folks already going through this process. So our new CTPAT supply chain specialists go through. We also open this up to others in other areas related to CTPAT. For example, the one I was in, we had a couple import specialists that were in there because they work so hand in hand with our CTPAT supply chain security specialists that, you know, they really need a better understanding of what the CTPAT folks do and vice versa, right? And so I found that the classes anyways that I sat through really worthwhile. And I think more is coming for that advanced training for, you know, our more senior CTPAT folks too.
That's great. Now, happy to hear that. I think the attendees are probably happy to hear that. Certainly the program asks of its members to continue educating and training their staff and updating that training. So it's nice to see that the program itself is taking that same position internally. Let me zoom out for a moment and go over to Brendan in Europe there. Brendan, I recall during your closing remarks at the Global AEO conference, you mentioned that the key outcomes from that conference would be captured in something that you called, or the WCO called, the Shenzhen Action Plan, which would be then presented to the SAFE working group, where the AEO concept and standards lives. So can you tell us a little bit more about how that process is going to work, and what are your and the WCO's expectations for that?
Sure. And Sean, let me first start with a big thank you for having the WCO and for having me participate in this webinar. It's certainly a great opportunity. Also a great opportunity for me to hear about what's going on in CTPAT. I'm hearing a lot of really exciting ideas that are coming up, and I really look forward to CTPAT coming to the WCO and sharing a lot of these new developments, which can really guide the way and guide the future of AEO programs all around the world. But yeah, the Shenzhen Action Plan. Look, when we started thinking about this conference, we didn't want it to be just another event where we talk without consequence. We really want to make sure that the insights and strategies that we all shared at the conference become a catalyst for real and meaningful and effective change. So what we envisage is that we'll include this in the agenda of the next SAFE working group. And we'll also prepare, what we'll do is we'll prepare a first draft of this action plan, drawing on all of the recommendations and ideas that came out of each of the panels. We had 8 plenary session panels and 6 breakout panels. So a lot of ideas were floated out there. We want to try and capture those, distill them, put it into a draft action plan that we can present to the SAFE working group. So we'll present it to all the members of the WCO to reflect on. And what we can do is incorporate this into the work plan of the SAFE working group so that we can carry the work forward. But with all good ideas, we really need to flesh some of them out and see what's behind them. So I imagine that, we might come up with a list of 20 or 30 recommendations, and we need to distill it, we need to flesh it out, and I imagine we'll come up with a smaller number. But I really hope that they'll be meaningful and impactful for AEO programs all around the world.
Fantastic. And I remember when you said that in China, I thought to myself, well, that's different. Nobody ever closes the conference with saying like, hey, let's hold ourselves accountable. So that was a bold, so I appreciate it. Shane, if I could go back to you, because I know you were also there for that moment, and I know the U.S. is incredibly active at the WCO, and particularly at the SAFE working group. So essentially, based on what Brendan was saying about it, what role do you see CBP and CTPAT in terms of supporting any of the efforts that come out of that initiative?
So first, sorry for the technical mishap. I don't know where I left off before, but if you need me to go back, I can. Welcome to like the day of the internet, right? So, I found the conference in Shenzhen really interesting, right? I mean, we had Secretary General open up and talked about, really underscored the importance of AEO programs around the world. We talked about, making AEO programs more accessible, right, to various countries and to various groups within those countries as well too, and the need to simplify the application processes and making it more accessible to smaller enterprises, et cetera. It was really, it was fascinating for me, and it seemed to align with some of the stuff I was talking about with us, right, within CTPAT, to streamline, to modernize, standardize what we're doing. But, simply put, I think CTPAT was the first AEO program in the world, right? And it serves as a cornerstone for economic security and growth. Those visionaries who started the CTPAT program really took a novel concept of working to streamline the bureaucracy of the customs processes that we do, that I hate, and while also bolstering supply chain security and the efficiency of the supply chain, right? So I honestly don't see a world where, whether it's the Shenzhen Action Plan or other opportunities to grow AEO programs, I don't see where CTPAT would not be right there in a leadership position, breaking down barriers as we've done in the past.
Great, thank you. I'm sure Brendan appreciates the advanced commitment from the U.S. Pete, let me go over to you now. You certainly offer a unique perspective on this panel. You've been working for the CTPAT program almost since its inception, right? When did you come on?
2005, yeah.
Yeah, 2005. So yeah, here we are, almost 20 years you've been in the program. You've worked as a supply chain security specialist, conducting validations, post-incident analysis, managing accounts, traveling around the world to check the supply chains. You've worked as a manager in the field, sitting in the director's chair now in the Miami office, and you've even served as the acting national director for a period of time. So you've seen it from all angles. So considering Dina's comments about her vision, and Shane as well, the vision of the program moving forward, what do you think might be like the greatest single challenge or a couple of challenges for the CTPAT program moving forward? And I'm going to take this opportunity to start peppering in some of these questions from the audience. You weren't going to get away with not having to address this one. Somebody's asking about the portal and the challenges with the portal. I know that you guys are working on it, but just if you have an update on kind of the state of the portal and progress being made on fixing some of those glitches. Over to you.
Man, you make me feel like I'm old, come on, you've been around, you've seen everything, you've been around, you've seen it all.
I look like a kid.
It's time for you to get out of here. No, but it's true, right? I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have been in this program for almost 20 years, right? Love it. I really enjoy it. I was always part of that bureaucracy, I think, Shane, right? I was part of the field. I was the one with the drill, and I was holding up cargo, and I was doing all that stuff, writing damaged merchandise SOPs. But it was great to become part of CTPAT and see how the other half lives and what the other side of business brings and where those goods are coming from, and kind of seeing beyond the borders. And really, it's been an incredible experience to be able to have all that. And it's funny, Shane mentions the SMS, I call it, right? The streamline, modernize, and standardize. And he's right. He has been talking about this. This is probably to the day, Shane. I think June 5th last year is when we met. It's when I started up in headquarters doing the acting thing. And you've been talking about it since then. So there's a score one for consistency right there. But that's great. I mean, that's what we need, right? You got persistence pays. You got to be like that. I think it speaks really well for the program, and it speaks well for CCS, but it also speaks to the buy-in from upper leadership in CTPAT, right? In the program itself. I think that says a lot about it. So that's huge for us, and it's nice to have the attention. We're in CTPAT. We've been in here 19 years. We do like attention, obviously. We like this program. We like what it does. We like making change. We like making things better and streamlining and getting that expedited cargo where we can, but also getting the supply chain security from it. So those are always going to be our linchpins with everything. But it's true over the years. I mean, some incredible changes, right? I remember the biggest thing was the increase in membership, and we passed 10,000. That was a huge milestone. Now we're looking at 18 MRAs across 44 nations, which is awesome and counting, right? We've added additional CTPAT offices throughout the years, expanded entities. We celebrated the 20th anniversary. So there's been so many interesting milestones and changes, and but throughout it's been, I think, the program's strength to evolve to those changing times, right? And the changing business environment. I think we actually had one of the conferences was about that new business environment and how to get past and how we were going to work together to meet these challenges. So I don't think that's any exception. There's no exception to that today. Our environment now is obviously new and many more complicated challenges, whether you're talking about cybersecurity threats, you're talking about fentanyl smuggling, climate change concerns, even the post-pandemic supply chain adjustments all of us are having to make, are making, or will be making in the coming years, right? To the rise of e-commerce. I think all these things now are coming at us fast and furious, right? And what the program's got to do, and it's been good about it in the past, but I think this is a different day and age, and it's a different playing field now, and there's different technology, and there's different nefarious sources that are working against us, right? And things we've got to address collectively as a public-private sector engagement, as that program to do. So it's going to be, that evolution, our ability to evolve, to modernize in this new environment is what's going to be CTPAT's biggest challenge, right? We got to be able to, tackle it together, both public and private sector. We got to work together in partnership to innovate and leverage all these new technologies we see. I know Shane's talked a lot about automation and artificial intelligence, and really that's where it's at. We're going to have to be embracing these technologies to see where it can help us secure our cargo, but also help us facilitate its movement, right? Where can we put those in place, air, land, and sea? we really need to be looking at those things. That's going to be our biggest challenge, is kind of embracing that technology, relooking at the program, of course, but I think the crux of what we need to be doing is what we're going to be doing together in collaboration, looking at advanced data analytics, things like that, supply chain transparency and tracking, using those tools to be able to do that, to be able to predict or forecast cargo surges, or times when there won't be those cargo surges, you can move resources elsewhere, and the use of the automation at the ports and borders, and AI to expedite clearance. These are going to be our top priorities, and I think our top challenges. They're challenges, but they're also opportunities, right? So we have, like I talked a little bit about buy-in early on. I think we have the attention, we have the right players involved, and the nearly 11,000 members of this program, and we have upper leadership, definitely focused on what we need to do to make that happen. So I think we're in a good position right now.
Thank you for that. Good points. Dina, while I have you for a few more minutes, I think if I could just ask you a question, or perhaps a theme of questions that seems to be coming in related to opening up additional business entities to the CTPAT program. I know historically there's been conversations about allowing warehouses in, or non-asset-based 3PLs, or even domestic highway carriers, and probably a few more that I'm not aware of. So from your perspective, is there currently any discussions about expanding the number of business entity types that can participate in the program? I think we lost Dina. All right. Shane or Pete, would you like to?
I'm losing you.
Yeah, Dina, I think your connection seems to be choppy right now. So I'm going to pivot to Pete and Shane on that question.
Yeah, Pete, I'll let you take a stab first, and then if I need to, I'll jump in.
Okay. This is part of that modernization effort. We're going to modernize that got going, right? We were talking about equipment the other day, Dean and I, and I've got some old desktop that really needs to be put out the pasture, but hey, but these things happen, right? But in terms of new entities, I'm not going to speak for Dina, but I know that I'll try, and she can always berate me later. But I know that, like anything else, we're having a good look within, looking at what's going on, keeping our ear to the ground in terms of trade and what's being asked about. We have in the past, and we started working groups to explore that idea of not only expanding CTPAT, but also maybe expanding some of the eligibility for certain entities that are already in the program. So those things are being looked at. Obviously, with e-commerce, I mentioned the rise of e-commerce and that whole sector, that needs our full attention. That is something that CTPAT is actively working on right now. We have a de minimis working group and everything else in that e-com world that we are actively seeking and looking at options, looking at things and how it could fit within CTPAT. So that's something that, to quote Dina, we're not going to unveil now, but it's something we're definitely going to be looking at and working on to make sure we are staying current. Obviously, with this business environment that's going on, we can't turn a blind eye to it. Obviously we need to be addressing those things. So that's kind of what I would put forward for you.
Sure. Shane? Thank you. Anything to add, Shane?
Yeah, I mean, look, longevity is not reason in and of itself to continue a bad practice. And I'm not saying that not expanding was a bad practice, because I don't know, because, I know there's rules to it, and, there's controls and things like that, and authorities particularly, right? So I'm certainly am open to it, and it falls in line with the SMS mantra that you've heard the three of us talk about, right? And that is part of the modernization mantra as to, look, if we're taking supply chain security seriously, then it would behoove us to really look at the supply chain and determine which elements of that supply chain are currently not in CTPAT and try to bring them in, because the best thing that we can do is secure that supply chain from start to finish.
Right. Thank you for that. And I know that it's a more challenging issue than it seems on the surface, because, you know, when you start introducing new entity types, then you're talking about expanding the membership numbers, you know, by quite a bit, right? And then how does that impact your resources, right? And then you have to have time to build up your resources and train people. So, but I appreciate your responses to that. Brendan, I have a question for you of my own, but I also have a question that came in from the audience that kind of dovetails with one of Pete's comments, but I'll throw it over to you because I think it's kind of asking a more global question, which is, essentially we have seen and we're continuing to see changes and updates in criteria in CTPAT. The minimum security criteria was significantly updated in 2020. The EU has updated a lot of their criteria, and we're seeing this kind of happen around the world. So Pete was mentioning all these mutual recognition arrangements, and so the question that came in is really about how are these changes to the requirements in the programs potentially impacting the existing mutual recognition arrangements, and what is the WCO doing in terms of harmonizing and standardizing that process, if at all?
Sure. Well, there's certainly a lot in that question. So let's try and break it down a little bit. Programs like CTPAT and other AEO programs around the world are maturing and evolving. So the criteria is going to change and hopefully improve and become more meaningful. What we need to ensure is that at the global level, we are evolving the program as well. So evolving the WCO AEO program and standards to ensure that at a bare minimum, we have common criteria. Now, some AEO programs, including CTPAT, are beginning to introduce ideas that have not met with a lot of enthusiasm, shall we say. The introduction of forced labor standards, for example, or criteria. For obvious reasons, there are some sections of the world that have issues with that for reasons we don't even need to talk about. Other AEO programs have concerns with that because they don't have any legal mandate to deal with them. That's not to say that each AEO program can't evolve in its own way. It should, but we should have some core criteria that are common. So it's ensuring that at the global level, we keep the program continuously evolving as well. That's why we really encourage all AEO programs to actively participate in the safe working group and to contribute to the evolution of the safe framework of standards. When it comes down to MRAs, the majority of the MRAs that exist globally are bilateral MRAs. That is something that we at the WCO don't have any control over. We've written some guidance on how MRAs should be negotiated, what they should include. We've written some guidance on multilateral MRAs as well. But at the end of the day, as CTPAT knows well, it's sitting down with your counterpart and doing a side-by-side and working through your programs, finding out where they match and where they don't match up. As programs evolve, we have to remember that we need to ensure that we're looking at our MRAs constantly to ensure that they're still valid. So I think I would probably offer that up as an initial answer.
Thank you for that. I want to reconnect with something that Shane mentioned about his kind of observations at the AEO conference, but ask you specifically. Now aside from your role as the Deputy Director of Facilitation, at that global conference, you served as a Master of Ceremonies, and you did a great job, even though you were hard on yourself, but you did a fantastic job, honestly. So obviously you are quite connected to the discussions and the topics because you were intimately involved throughout the 3 days. A topic that came up multiple times and seemed to be connected to various topics was this kind of theme about micro and small, medium-sized enterprises getting access not only to global trade, but getting access to global trade through AEO programs. And while these AEO programs are designed to be all inclusive, right? Any actors, for the most part, in the supply chain can participate. We do see that regionally, or even in some countries, that it's really a struggle for those smaller companies to get access. In fact, there's one country actually makes it impossible because there's a standard of trade activity that a small company can't even meet. I know that they're in the process. That country's in the process of revising that rule. But anyway, all that to say is, how is the AEO working, particularly out of those conversations in China, on this issue to help these small companies get access to AEO? And I'll just ask Pete and Shane to keep in mind, as Brendan is answering here, that CTPAT sits uniquely in this situation, as a large percentage of the membership of CTPAT is actually small, medium-sized, micro to small, medium-sized enterprises. So it seems that CTPAT and CBP may be positioned to assist in any initiative that the WCO takes on regarding this topic. But anyway, over to you, Brendan, for your reaction to that.
Great, thanks. And let me start with a little story. Many years ago, I was sitting next to Brad Skinner, who at the CTPAT conference, he was the director at the time. And CTPAT hadn't quite reached the 10,000 mark, but we were getting really close. And the commissioner at the time challenged Brad Skinner, thinking of SMEs at the time. And he challenged him to, within the next 2 years, I think it was to grow the CTPAT program to 40,000 participants. That was a lofty goal, and I think we're probably still working on it. Look, the issue of SMEs for me is really kind of a two-pronged issue. It's number one, about ensuring that programs are staying true to the WCO AEO program concept, which is very much like CTPAT. It's a scalable program. It's meant to be scalable. It's meant to apply to a company of 200,000 as well as a company of 2. What we have seen in the development of AEO programs around the world is they go for the percentage of trade. They hit their top 40% or 50%, and they stop there. Now, that is sometimes driven by economics, in that they can't afford to go beyond that because they don't have the infrastructure to sustain it. But we want to push them to ensure that they are including SMEs, because the second aspect of this is about economics. It's including SMEs. That's where the real growth in the economy, we believe, is going to be in the next several years. You need to pull the SMEs into it so that they can participate in the global economy and raise themselves, and also raise their countries and customs administration territories along with it. So it's really, for me, a two-pronged approach. So I'm really excited to hear about what CTPAT is doing in this area, particularly when it comes to issues like outreach. Something that really struck me about a year ago, I was at a conference, and we're talking about SMEs, and somebody noted that over 50% of SMEs and MSMEs are led by women. And it really got me thinking about, what are we doing wrong, or what do we need to do differently to ensure that we're getting that message out to that particular segment of the population? And I've really challenged my folks back at the WCO to look at SMEs, NISMEs, and the gender factor that comes into it. Maybe we're not doing anything wrong. We're just stuck with the challenges that SMEs and NISMEs have, and it's the fear of the resources that it would take to participate in it. But something that we are doing is we've partnered with the WTO, the World Trade Organization. They have an informal working group on NISMEs, and we through the WCO. You may be aware that we launched a survey of AEO programs back in late March, and we've included 2 specific questions on SMEs and NISMEs. And we're really looking forward to getting some of that information back so that we can distill it and put it into a joint report, number one, between the WTO and the WCO, and then also use as information to inform what our next actions should be at the WCO to ensure that we are reaching that segment of the population.
So thanks, Brendan. Shane, I'll go to you because I know you're getting a little short on time, and I'll preface any reaction you have to that with CTPAT has that large number of small, medium-sized enterprises in the program, probably due to many things, but one of them is simply it's pure luck that the auto industry is so vibrant in North America and connected on the northern and southern border. And it really drives the participation of small and medium-sized enterprises that participate in those supply chains. But aside from that, what other kind of actions is CBP taking to draw in more of those small and medium-sized enterprises?
So look, I mean, the United States has, I think it's still the largest economy in the world, right? And that's not just an economy of big business, right? The predominant economic factor for the US is small businesses, right? And that's down to just the one guy who's running a trucking company, crossing the border between Toronto and Buffalo every day, that decided that they wanted to be in CTPAT, right? I think one of the best things that we could have done is make that investment. And that's relatively easier, I think, for us within CBP because we're uniquely positioned, right? We are the border entity, right? So I don't have another custom service to deal with or a border force to deal with or another police to deal with. Like we're it. We are the customs, border force, law enforcement organization at the borders of the United States. So it's one entity, which makes it easier for us to pull some of those resources. But as the guy sitting at headquarters, looking at all this activity, I know how expensive it is, right? I know it's expensive for our partners to meet our criteria and to go through the validation process and all the work to be in the CTPAT program. I also know from our perspective how expensive it is to do those validations, right? Our folks travel around the world to places I've never heard of to do validations, but we make that investment because the supply chain security of our country and others is so important that we have to do it. And I agree with kind of what Brendan said, which is a lot of countries look at just the biggest chunk of the economy and that's who they're going to target. But that's one of our biggest chunks of our economy is those small, medium businesses that we have to go after, right? And get them and help them, I should say, be part of the CTPAT program and to help them secure their supply chain.
Thanks, Shane. Pete, unless you have a comment you want to make, I have a question that really dovetails nicely with Shane's comments. So the virtual validation process was born out of the pandemic. And I think it was demonstrated to be a very effective tool to use under those circumstances. And then as we came out of the pandemic, we saw that it was continuing to be used, and it's still being used today based on risk, which I think is probably the right way to go. But I'm curious, well, one, if there's any updates to the vision of the virtual validation. Like, is it going to stay forever? Is it going to change? Is it going to increase, decrease? But also, what your opinion is based on some of the findings coming out of those validations. If small and medium-sized enterprises struggle with that process, or it makes it easier. I don't know if you're seeing that kind of data come in for the virtual validations, but I'd be curious to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, in my opinion, there's no substitute for the real thing, right? I'm a big proponent of the face-to-face communication, you know, in order to have those meaningful interactions. Something like this is great. It's like the next best thing, right? It's Diet Coke. But, you know, with that being said, the virtual validation process has been it's been instrumental for the program. Clearly, when the pandemic came, this was our lifeline. This is what we used to make sure we had that mechanism to, and the assurance, right, with our low risk partners that they were maintaining due diligence to the extent possible. We all know there were maybe just, you know, some of the roadblocks to getting in communication through mediums like this, but also the pandemic itself was affecting business models and operations. But it gave us that ability at least to know the next best thing, know what we could do and find out, hey, procedures are still in place. What are you facing? We could talk, we could interface and do all those things, right? So hugely valuable to us during that time, right? I worked on the team that developed them for us. I mean, before this, of course, we had a telephonic process. You might remember we would do telephonic validations at one time with some of our really low risk entities. So really just kind of was born out of that, kind of taking it to the next level because we had more ability to embrace that technology like we talked about and do something with it, right? But so the pros for that were that, yeah, it was a necessary lifeline. I do think that the small and medium-sized enterprises do like this process, right? If it works out that they're low risk and they're a small, medium, of course, because think about the resources you can save, right? The personnel, the time, the travel, all those things that Shane mentioned that are costs. They're difficult. It's not easy for every country. It's not easy for every program to be able to support that, right? So something like this, virtual validations, if used the right way, right, and if used according to our standard operating procedures and based on risk, we want to keep that intact, right? I think that's always been from the outset, making sure we kept, you know, to quote Director Isaacson from Buffalo, the sanctity of the program, but it means more the integrity of the program, right? To make sure that we're doing right by the trade, but also doing right by what CBP needs to do and CTPAT as a result, right? But I do think that there is favorable reaction to it for the small and medium-sized enterprises. I do think they are happy to have it available to them. It may not be an all the time thing. We're not going to do it every cycle, for example, but I do see virtual validations sticking around. As we talked about, I think when we rolled them out, this is a tool in the toolbox for CTPAT, right? They come incredibly handy when you need it. You know, things do come up again, man-made disasters, natural disasters, whatever happens, we have that ability to do it. We do have low risk entities where it makes just complete and total sense to talk like this and go over some documents and where there's no cargo involved, things like that. Or if you've seen a company 5 and 6 times in the past and they're doing great and they're having no changes to their business model, some of that makes a lot of sense, right? To keep on doing those kinds of things. In terms of the cons with it, you know, it's hard to fit a CTPAT validation into a tiny screen or in this little box that I'm in, right? And get a full picture and understanding of what's going on with a company's culture, because I can't tell you what CT Strategies is like or what Brendan's office is like, and I'm not there. I don't feel it. I don't see it. You know, it's difficult to get an idea of the security layout through this medium. It's difficult to understand the threat context in a particular city, but not just a city, but the state, a province, a region. You don't get that feel where you can actually make better recommendations or better observations on what's going on. And it's difficult to get that buy-in sometimes from say a supplier or a service provider or a carrier when you're not present in the room, really to impart the importance of the supply chain security that you're talking about, and even talk about tough issues, right? You're not going to have that same exchange that you would have sitting around a table and then walking a facility. And then this has come up so many times when I've been at a facility visiting. They say, no, we need you to be there. I want you to see our packing and not just our shipping area. We want to see you. We want to see packing. I want everybody to see you here to understand that it's important to you, that it's also important to us. These are things that we're championing in our business, and we want to make sure that they understand the full gravity of that. So that's huge. It's what's huge about being on site. So that's the con, I think, with the virtual validation process, is you lose some of that when you really need it. Obviously, we want to keep it to where the low and medium risk entities are. There are high risk areas. This is a supply chain security program with everybody should be low risk, right? But there are regions that are higher risk. There are different threats being faced. So the virtual validation process wouldn't be applicable to all locations. It was our intent to make sure we followed our own risk-based approach when deciding who could be done virtually, right? And we keep that pretty much in place. And that's, going forward, I do think that we're going to be keeping this process. It's an excellent way for us to also reduce our administrative costs and some of the burden. It's a great way for us. We've documented this in saving CO2 emissions. You think about the SESSs that aren't going to countries that DXD Campbell can't pronounce because they don't have to in certain situations, right? I mean, really, it does save a lot, and it saves us, but it also saves the trade, right? And it makes sense. It makes good business sense to be able to do that. So that's almost like a pro and a con, right? Where you have those two things. So
Well, fair enough. I can't pronounce half the
right.
I don't take offense, John, because Pete always makes fun of my hillbilly roots. But I want to add in a little bit to what he said too, which is there is the hybrid version, right? And we are and have had discussions over the past few months about how can we do a hybrid validation where we can, right? And this also, I think, goes into what Brendan was talking about earlier about like expanding to more in other countries, right? Where let's use our systems, whether it's what information we have in the portals and through AI and robotic processing and other avenues of getting information, let's bring that into our validation process. So then when I go and do a physical validation, maybe instead of tying up folks for 6 to 7 hours as we go through the full validation process, I may only have to come in for an hour to physically validate just a few things that are on the list that we weren't able to do virtually, which is really a boon for our partners because it lessens the burdens of us interfering with their business operations during that time period where we'd be there full day. But also for us too, that may allow us to actually get more validations done within that geographic area, much less expensive and much more quickly too, which is good for the partners because you get a faster response as to, hey, validation went great, and now you're good for the next few years.
Yeah, thanks for that. We're starting to see that a lot more now in the past couple of months, really, with some of our CTPAT clients where they're experiencing that. So there'll be a virtual validation for their domestic distribution center, say, but there'll be a physical validation at one of their suppliers in Asia. And I actually think that's a really great way of moving forward. It's like identifying through risk, like you said, Pete, where you can effectively use that tool and where you still need to have people physically present. So that's great. Brendan, I'd like to get your position on this as well, because I know that the AEO at the same time during the pandemic quickly was trying to figure out solutions to all of these challenges. One being how to validate companies for AEO companies when you couldn't physically go there. So there were some initiatives put forward by the WCO on virtual validation. So over to you.
Yeah, great, thanks. And yes, indeed at the global level at the WCO, and thanks really to CBP's leadership, we were able to develop some guidelines on virtual validations so that other AEO programs could better understand how it would work and what could be done, what maybe can't be done. So it's really kind of exciting to hear how CTPAT is evolving with the virtual validations and how you might be using them in the future. It's similar to CTPAT. I think what we're hearing from other AEO programs is they're using them, they are using them, but they are using them perhaps sparingly now. For perhaps revalidations or check-ins or checkups on certain issues. But they are, I think, a very important tool. And I would really encourage CBP to help ensure that the guidelines that we have at the WCO evolve along with what CBP is doing as well. And, I can imagine that some in CTPAT leadership are thinking, oh, I can't afford the time or personnel to do this. So I would actually kind of turn that around and say, can you afford not to? You have an incredible opportunity to turn every other AEO program into a force multiplier in supply chain security. So just a little plug from me to encourage you to work with us at the WCO to ensure that we're keeping our AEO program modern and efficient as well.
Brendan, these guys are never going to join another webinar with me because you're assigning work to them. They're busy already. But point well taken. Point well taken. I do think that the U.S. stands in a nice position to help with this concept at the WCO level, because I would argue that I don't think anybody else on the planet in terms of AEO programs has done the sheer number of virtual validations that CTPAT has. I think it's upwards of 3,000-4,000 at this point, maybe even higher. I don't know, Pete. I see you nodding, so I must be close. All right. So I want to get into a few more questions that are coming in online. The first one I think I'll actually take a stab at, and then by all means, Pete, Shane, correct me or add to it. So there's a question that came in: do you know the breakdown of tier 2 versus tier 3 members, and what additional benefits the tier 3 members receive in the CTPAT program? So first of all, I think that one thing that always confuses people is that the tiers are specific to the importer entity only. So it's not like highway carriers or tier 1, 2, or 3. It's simply in the importer category. The majority of importers are tier 2 importers. There's a small subset that are tier 3, and that's always been around the 300 mark, and it really has not changed that much. And my understanding from the CTPAT program is that's the way they like it. That's a small number of companies that represent really an elite group that go above and beyond the minimum security criteria and demonstrate best practices in pretty much every category within the requirements. In terms of the different differences in benefits, I'll definitely let CTPAT answer that part of it directly. But Pete, did I at least get the tier breakdown correct?
Oh, you did. Yeah, you did. For sure. Yeah, you did.
All right. Do you want to take on the benefits difference?
Yeah, I mean, tier 3s, obviously that's the cream of the crop, right? Those that are tier 3 out there know what we expect. It's a very small, and it's been consistent, right? I think that small group, they're the elite. They're the ones that are doing all those things on a daily basis that are amazing, right? And going above and beyond that minimum security criteria, which it's in its name, it's minimum, right? It's the floor, right? It's not the ceiling. But they are doing all those things, and it's evidenced time and time again throughout each validation. As a result, obviously you got the benefits of tier 1, tier 2, but you got the third level, which is the highest that you're going to get, right? So clearly, the importers in the tier 3 world, clearly in the seaport maritime environment, that's where it's evidenced most effectively, right? And I think through our targeting systems and things like that, when we do have shipments come in, having that tier 3 moniker, having that status is something that weighs heavily in the decision-making process and the analytical process and the movement of cargo through the ports of entry. So rest assured that when you are tier 3, you are receiving that highest weight basically on your goods coming in, so that we know that, hey, these are a tier 3 CTPAT company. The reduced inspections, it's not going to guarantee, obviously, when we talked about that lots of times in the past, but from a security examination standpoint, it's going to reduce those inspections. It's going to lead to softer techniques if at all necessary, but those benefits are in place. You were not stopping there, right? I know that, to Shane's point early on in the call, we talked about, re-looking at all these benefits, re-examining the benefits, making these benefits modernized and modernizing them to the modern day environment. And that's what we got to do, right? We're not going to stop there. We're going to be looking at these. We are currently looking at these in a lot of our strategic priorities to see where we can increase them, to see where we can tweak them, where we need to tweak them, where they make sense, whether it's air, land, or sea. Really talk about it, get the trades input, see where we can make these changes, because the opportunities are there. The changes have been coming at us fast and furious. We talked about e-com and those things, and different environments and different potential entities in the program. And there's different entities out there now. Every day there's something new. It seems like we go 3, 4, 5 PL, you know, so there's so many things going on now that need a look, and we need to understand what trade is doing. And when we understand that, we can make better decisions about how we can tweak the benefits to get them even better for our tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 partners. So
Pete, a lot of your comments are like connecting to other questions that are coming in. So it looks like you're possibly
good or
going to be on the
bad.
spot.
Maybe
here.
I was sneaking at the chat. I was taking a look at it.
Yeah. But first, let me just explain one thing that you mentioned that wasn't in the question before we get other questions about it. You mentioned tier 1. So tier 1 is a temporary status, because tier 1 is when you have submitted your application, completed your security profile, and it gets approved, you become certified, and that
Correct.
certified status for an importer, again, is considered tier 1, and it changes to tier 3 after validation. So there's no such thing as anybody being tier 1 forever, at least theoretically, right?
That's right. In theory, for sure. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a couple other questions that came in, and they're specific, but I think they're important questions. So one question said, for Mexican carriers that are certified CTPAT but are not validated, is OEA Mexico, so the Mexican AEO program, the only solution to receive the benefits of the fast lane, referring to CTPAT not traveling to Nuevo Laredo to validate? So I read it word for word. Hopefully that
Yeah, I mean,
made sense to you.
I get the gist of it. I know that there's been concern about that area. For us, it's a difficult location for us. It's travel deferred. So, right. So we do, in true fashion, and with the WCO on the line, we do leverage our MRAs for this, right? We look to Mexico to help us out with that. And that's what we rely on now, is to do that. We had the occasion, I think last year, we were able to go into Nuevo Laredo to do some validations there for the first time in over a decade, right, in Nuevo Laredo. So that was a fantastic experience to be able to do that. I actually went with the teams a couple of days, and it was great to get back in there. I used to go there probably 10, 15 years ago, right? But we're going to try to do more of that, right? We want to start talking to the local RSOs, talking to the State Department, talking to the CBP at the local ports of entry there to see about getting in there more, if we can, to do some more of these validations, because there's, and you pointed out earlier, Sean, about the business that's ancillary to that operation there. It brings in a lot of small, medium-sized enterprises, right, as a result. So it kind of feeds the program. We're aware of that. We want to do what we can to get these companies in. We want to do what we can for the companies that are already in, that are waiting for us to come see them where we can. But we do want to make sure that we are leveraging our MRAs where we can. Sometimes it comes down to resources and personnel, things like that. There are limitations to everything, right? But working together, we can probably get, work on some inroads in there to do that. But for now, I mean, we are leaning on OEA in those situations, with Nuevo Laredo in particular. Some of those areas in Tamaulipas are very difficult for us to get into, even with the blessing of the State Department, even with armored vehicles, which we had to have armored vehicles and military escorts to even get into Nuevo Laredo. So you can see how that can be a pretty sticky situation. But there's some cities along that line which you can't even do those things. They say, nope, it's a hard stop. You're not going in there. So until those things are resolved, it's going to be really difficult for us to have a blanket policy for the state of Tamaulipas, but some of those areas in Mexico and other places that are high risk like that.
But at least you have some sort of mechanism to address that. It may not be perfect, understanding
right.
that it's a fluid situation, but you have the ability to leverage those MRA relationships, which is great.
And it's something we're looking at too, to find some other alternatives to that, to get things moving.
So the next question came in, also connected to that question, but I think, Brendan, you can probably chime in on this as well. So the specific question is asking if a company is both Mexico AEO or OEA and CTPAT, and they lose their certification, will that negatively impact their standing in the other program? So my understanding is that regardless of the two countries, if it's any two countries that have a mutual recognition arrangement, part of that arrangement is the exchange of data. And one of those data points is the status of the company. If a company becomes suspended, there's supposed to be a communication protocol in place to notify the MRA partner that this company has been suspended, and they're supposed to take similar action on the other side until an investigation concludes what the situation was. So maybe I'll go to you, Brendan, first from that kind of global shot, and then Pete, if you want to address it more specifically to the CTPAT and Mexico OEA.
Well, thanks really for answering the question. You're absolutely right. There should be communication protocols between the two customs administrations that are ensuring any bad actors or actors that are suspended for whatever reason, even on a temporary basis, that there's that notification so folks know to hold off on that until the situation is resolved. It could potentially also be a situation where there is an issue with one country that's impacting their membership. There may not necessarily be impacting the other, but you're right. The way that it should be working is that that communication takes place, and both memberships are put on hold pending the outcome of an investigation.
Yeah, I would just add to that as we automate our systems and fine tune and get better processes and enhance these communication systems, it'll be easier to do that, right? It'll be easier to identify when something like that happens, and you can actually hold those benefits in abeyance until those things are resolved. It's also important to note that we don't share any information that the company hasn't allowed us to share, in a sense. Like most of the time when you have these agreements, a company has to be aware that we're going to be talking, that you're okay with us sharing information with the partner MRA country. So that's an important point there too. But yep, Brendan's got it on the nose.
All right, very good. A few more questions I'd love to get to as we're running out of time here. One of them I think you addressed indirectly, but I want to ask you directly, Pete. The CTPAT program always has been, continues to be import focused for obvious reasons. The way that it was, the program began kind of as a result of the attacks on 9/11. But anyway, you talked about, and so did Shane, about expanding benefits, making benefits meaningful, all of these things in the context of imports for the most part, because that makes up the majority of the program and the priority. But there is an exporter component to CTPAT. There are members that are exporters. Most of them are importers and exporters. But is part of that vision to look at additional benefits for exporters?
It is. Come on, exporters are waiting for you, right? I'm looking for the true exporters. We don't have a whole ton of them in Miami, but we do have some here and there. But you're right about the importer exporters. We do see a lot of those. So it's going to be part of that profile too that we need to be looking at. Obviously it's an important component, especially when we're talking about our MRA partners and where goods are going. That is always part of the conversation when we talk about MRAs and make these agreements is, hey, this is a two-way street. So we want to make sure that on the receiving end, with goods going out, they're also receiving their proper benefits and reciprocal benefits at that foreign host country. So it will be something that's going to be looked at. It will be something that's on the docket for us. We're not being forgetful of it, I know, but obviously there's lots of priorities. There's a lot of strategic priorities that are above my pay grade, but I know that that's something that we'll be taking a look at.
Perhaps we've identified a topic for a future webinar to focus on exporters.
That's a juicy one. Yeah, that's good.
If I can add in on this, so our gentleman who speaks Queen's English as opposed to the Queen's English, back in the day, there was a vision that AEO programs would evolve to such a state, and MRAs would evolve to such a state that you would only really focus on exporters, because your MRA partners would be validating those supply chains in their respective countries. Now, we're a far way away from that, but that was a vision many years ago.
That's it's a challenge in the U.S. just because of the way the program started and its focus. It's hard to shift that momentum. But clearly, I think there's opportunities. I think there's a COAC subgroup that's working on some exporter related aspects. If I'm not incorrect.
And just for clarity's sake, like that's to clarify, that's part of the conversation with your MRA partner is sending that information to make sure that those importers who are exporting to the UK or exporting to Peru, they are receiving those reciprocal benefits. Right. So really that is happening, right? But do we need to talk a little bit more about those? Probably. Do we need to make sure that there's more a more robust exporter program? I think so. It's time for that, as Brendan hinted to.
All right, we're getting close on time here. There's one more question that came in that we talked briefly about when we answered another question, but it's specific to Tier 3 again and CTPAT. So basically, if a company is working to enhance their supply chain security program, what can they do to become a Tier 3 member? Now, before I hand it over to you, Pete, I'll take a stab at this. That essentially, there's 12 sections in the minimum security criteria, and those are broken into 3 focus areas. But a company really needs to demonstrate best practices within each of those sections, not necessarily every single minimum security criteria, right? There's like 200 of these things. Right. I don't think there's any expectation by the CTPAT program that you've got to be exceeding in every one of those responses. But category-wise, you need to be demonstrating in each category that you have some processes and procedures, infrastructure, technology, whatever it is, that is above and beyond the requirements. So that's my understanding of how a company moves from Tier 2 to Tier 3. But Pete, please add to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, I know that's been a hot topic for a long time. And I know we have the best practices framework that's been put out there. In the past, we've had, hey, these are all the best practices that companies are doing. And we had that out there. And then 5 years later, it was like, hey, that's the way people do business. It's standard, right? So we went away from that and we have a framework, right? And that framework is what you apply to each of those categories or maybe to each of those focus areas that show that you're going above and beyond, whether it's documentation, whether it's process, whether it's how you analyze what's going on within your supply chain, what you're doing, obviously incorporating some of those new technologies we talked about now, things like that, where you're really stepping up and taking on some of the challenges, right? And some of these opportunities we talked about, that we're seeing right now in this new business environment. How are you taking that on and addressing it? And how are you putting that out to your entire organization, not just here in Queens, New York or something like that, but also internationally and then globally and then on a corporate level? Like, what are you doing to really champion that throughout your supply chain? Those are some of the things that we're looking at, right? To make sure that it's definitely leading the pack. It's definitely above and beyond the minimum, right, security criteria. It's the floor, right? You want to hit that ceiling and really evidence that you're taking all those steps to address these new and emerging threats, as opposed to just kind of the standard operating procedure for a business, right? Some of the things we've already seen happen, right? It's maybe not this, it's not novel now to have a high security seal, right? That we need to step it up from high security seals, and maybe we need to look at smart security devices. And that's been discussed too in future criteria. Is like, maybe it's time to start ramping up that area to make sure we're keeping up with the times, because hey, these technologies are available, they're commercially available. It's time to maybe bring it up a notch. And I think that's what we look for in the Tier 3s.
No, thanks for that. Before I start wrapping up, I'd like to give you both just an opportunity for any last words, and I'll phrase it in a question. Brendan, to you first. If you had one wish for AEO to make it better, to and enhance it, to optimize it, whatever word you want to choose, what would that wish be?
That we have greater consistency throughout AEO programs globally, that we evolve the WCO AEO program along with all the other programs in a way that we have a large core set of principles and standards that everybody would adhere to, that would really help with issues like mutual recognition and the confidence that each AEO program is doing what it has committed to do.
Thank you. Pete, over to you. Same question, but specific to CTPAT.
Okay. Just before I start with that, I know you asked me a portal question, and I know that's been a hot topic in the chat too.
Yes.
Obviously, we're working with the portal too. This was something we needed to talk about modernization, talk about cybersecurity. This was something that was needed, based on CBP requirements, things like that. Obviously, we got to, evolve with our system, and that's what the portal is. We realize, we've been working on it hard day and night. I know I met with some of the team a couple of weeks ago in Virginia. I got an idea of how difficult and how monumental this task is. So we're aware, we're working on it day and night, and I get updates frequently from our team that's actually tasked with it to make sure that we're doing what we can to fix anything that's not working right, or to improve it where we can. So the feedback helps. The work tickets that are put in are all helping. We're only getting better. I know it's been difficult, making that change. It's difficult internally. People are getting used to a new system, a new field, but I think in the long run, it's going to pay off. It's going to pay huge dividends, not just for security, for our information, for the way we talk, but also for how we're using it, the user interface, things like that. But for the AEO question, I think Brendan's right. I was thinking about the SMEs and the small, medium size, and I think it's about demystifying that whole process, right? And getting out and talking and engaging. We're doing that. I wanted to mention this before, but we have teams traveling, all kinds of travel right now. So I wanted to thank Dina and Shane for that earlier, because they really made the funding happen for us. We're back up in the skies to the tune that we were back when you were working with us, Sean, where we're doing a lot of the Asia, Middle East, Europe, where we need to be, where we haven't been for a long time. Of course, we're hitting Mexico and Canada and where we need to go as well there, but we're doing some of those visits where we haven't been in a long time, right? On-site visits, in-person visits, which is fantastic. And I think, we're taking advantage of the opportunity there to talk to a lot of the nations that we've had work with. And I know when I was acting last year, the IPEF nations, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework nations, were huge on the list for CBP, for Department of Commerce. So a lot of these nations we're working with, or at least talking to. When we do have teams that go out on these validations, and to my point about demystification, is we're going and meeting with them, we're inviting them to the meetings. We want to get this out. We want to promote the program, promote what AEO is about, promote the WCO, promote that standard framework, right? We want to make sure they know that framework of standards is there. But I think that's half the battle is getting the information out there, letting them understand what it is, they need to do with it and how they can do that. And maybe, I know that's it's resources, sometimes it's personnel and all that stuff, but sometimes it's like, hey, this isn't what you think. Here's what we do. Here's how it works. Yes, there's going to be some financial buy-in, some costs associated with in certain respects for these other governments, but we got to be there to help them. We got to be there to kind of help them, find out what it's all about and what we can do to assist with that. So that's part of the capacity building we're looking to do. I think there's going to be more of that in talking to upper leadership. They want to promote that more. I think you guys probably got a good sense of that during the conference in China. So hopefully that's where we're going to continue to go, because I think that's the answer, right? Is using those MRAs and using those countries, not using, but also taking advantage of them as a force multiplier, right? So we all can benefit. It's not just us, or it's not just trade. It's going to be everybody benefiting from that. So that's my wish, I guess, my one wish, right? That we get that move forward. And we expand the programs, right?
Sure. No, I thank you, gentlemen. Before I sign off, I want to make sure to let the audience know. I believe we got to a majority of the questions, either directly or indirectly. I know there was a couple of questions we didn't get to for sure that were asking about brokers. I will respond to those and ask CTPAT to respond to those. I'll share those questions with them, and we'll send them out to the audience, so that hopefully we've then answered all of the questions. I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. I want to thank our panel again, also Dina and Shane, who had to step off early, but thank you very much for being a part of this webinar. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you guys again on a future webinar, or at least at other events. And if you have any questions for us at CT Strategies, feel free to reach out to us. Otherwise, wishing you all a good day and hope to see you again soon. So thank you,
Thanks all.
everyone.
Director Amato sends her best. She had to step away, so she wanted me to make sure I told you guys.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean.
Very much.
Take care now.
Everybody.